doing?
Oh, okay, how are you?
Very good.
Oh, I'm sorry, I stepped on your foot.
Oh, no, it's all
This
good.
is going horribly already.
Oh, stop.
Please have a seat,
Oh,
please.
yes.
It is so nice to meet you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. It's Robert Townsend. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you were born and raised, or you were raised in Chicago.
Yes.
What do you wish that people knew about Chicago?
When I think of Chicago, I grew up in the hood, but I always considered it glorious and beautiful. And, when people think of it as nasty or the gangs and all of that, but I think in all, communities you have that other side. I think the misconception about Chicago is that there's so much poverty and everything is wrong, but there's a lot of beautiful people. And where I came from, the neighborhood, the village raised the village.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It takes a village to raise a child, and it's like there was a community. Everybody cared. And so that's what I really remember. And I think that's what I would really send the message and say, don't judge a book by its cover, because you hear about a few things. But my childhood, I just have the best memories of growing up. And, when you don't know what's in everybody else's refrigerator, you don't know what you're missing. So as a kid, I had no idea, but we had love and we had God, and that was the most important thing.
What was baby Robert like? Like when you were younger, what kind of kid were you?
When I was a kid, I was, because I lived in a rough neighborhood, I would rush home from school and all I did was watch television. And so back then, when I was 8 years old, my nickname was TV Guide. Because I watched so much television, I could tell you everything about TV. So I was this kid that saw the world through television.
And you also did Second City in Chicago?
Yes, I studied with Joe Forsberg, improv with her, and she was Bill Murray's improv teacher.
Wow.
So I was, I was a kid, 17, 18, and I was, doing theater with X-Back as well as studying at Second City.
What was Second City like?
You know what? I learned my manners as an actor at Second City, because what they taught you was that if you can improvise and create something from nothing, when you had the props, you could change the world. And so they, you had a chair, and that chair could be a rocket ship, So you just had all these illusions and things that you created. But I learned so much by understanding the ability to create with nothing.
So how has the industry changed since you first started?
Well, here's the thing. I think it's a different time in Hollywood. It really is, because there are more images. So when you think in terms of the characters that Shonda Rhimes has created, How to Get Away with Murder, Scandal. When you think in terms of the shows that are on OWN, like Queen Sugar, when you think in terms of BET and, The Quad and different shows, everybody, on HBO, Insecure, there's a lot of new images out there. There's new voices, and I think that the game is changing. Is there room for more? Yes.
Absolutely.
But the game is changing, I think, in a good way, though there is still baggage from the old days.
Let's talk superheroes. You seem to have an interest in them.
I just love, as a director, touching different things, and I love fantasy. And Meteor Man came about because when my nephew was really little, I live in L.A., and my family, he was living in Chicago, and he was a little kid. He's 6 years old, and I said, for Halloween, who are you going to be? You're going to be Spider-Man? You're going to be Batman? And he says, I can't be them because they're white. And I was as a little kid, and I was no, I love everybody. You could be whatever you want. And then when he said that, it kind of hurt my heart, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to create a superhero of color to fill that void. And then that's when I started to write Meteor Man and come up with the legend of, Meteor Man and, making a superhero from scratch.
Were you, to any degree, offended when people were like, yay, Black Panther, we finally got a black superhero? And you're like, hello, Meteor Man?
Well, on social media, people were, defending me and different things. Robert Townsend been in Wakanda for 25 years. Yeah, y'all
right,
talking
though.
about it.
They are right.
But here's the thing. When I see, Black Panther or Luke Cage or Black Lightning, those are all my cinematic sons and daughters. They really are, because I know I planted a seed. And, when I think about, Black Panther, making $1 billion, I was going for $1 billion back then. It's just that the audience didn't catch up to the vision.
Yeah.
And so when I created Meteor Man, I had every celebrity. I had, from Naughty by Nature to Nancy Wilson to Luther Vandross to
Luther.
Robert Guillaume, Marla Gibbs, Sinbad. It was an all-star
Wild,
cast.
yeah.
So but I just feel that I've always been a pioneer on certain levels where I try stuff that other people wouldn't, and sometimes you get a little it takes a moment for the audience to catch up to you sometimes when you have that kind of vision.
How do you remain optimistic?
The thing that I would say is that what our jobs are really about as artists is to create change through our art. Anytime you can get a chance to say something, to create something, it's kind of like the Fool in King Lear. The Fool says a lot of good stuff and strong stuff, but he uses, honey to say it and use it. So I think, you can get depressed or you can get sad by what's going on, but I tend to look and I go, look what happened. People said, oh, the civil rights movement is over with. We don't have to do anything, and it's like I was getting an award with John Lewis, and I was sitting at this table with John Lewis, and I was talking to him, and, he said, the pendulum has swung back. He said, I thought all this was gone. And he says, when he's seen everything, he says, I've got to dig my heels in now and fight even harder. And I feel the same way as an artist, as a filmmaker. Everything I've got to do, I've got to sprinkle in my messages that will hopefully plant other seeds in people that are listening. Because it's not about just being funny or being stupid or what have you. It's as artists, and especially artists of color, I want to plant those kind of seeds. I want, like knowing that the Parenthood did help raise a generation of babies to do positive things and, want to do the right thing. I feel really happy. There's other stories that I want to tell, and it's about, looking at tough times and saying, how can I make it better?